Welcome, everybody. We're having the guests of the California chapter of the American Rhododendron Society, so welcome. So if garden they would like to share. We love going on garden tours, so let us know. Yeah, we got some good field trips coming up here soon. So if somebody want to plug the Western Hort field trip,
Oh, I don't know a lot about it, but what they announced to the meeting, this is Janet, was that Sheena talked to our group at our meeting this week. It's her orchard. It's a you pick orchard, and she'll have fruit for picking, probably apples at this point, and tasting. And then they also have any late summer veggies that will be around that you see there. You can tour a nursery. They grow their nursery is growing plants for farmers. They're not plants for home gardeners, but you can tour the nursery and see their operation if you want. Also, and they have a nice place on the grounds where you can have a picnic, bring your own lunch, and you can always bring something to share if you want. And then after that, Los Arroyos Nursery is close by in Watsonville. So basically you'll be working way back north. And Lionel Morales talked to our group. He used to work for Monterey Bay. And he's growing a lot of natives, and he talked about his propagation of his natives and how he's doing that. So you'll get a chance to see his operation if you're interested in seeing that too.
And seeing operation, will you be able to buy plants?
That I don't know, because it is a wholesale nursery.
Okay, well, you probably get them at your local nursery, I'm sure. Okay, well, sounds like fun. And then, you know, a bunch of people want to come up from up here. You guys want to go together. If you need you might be able to connect through CalHort at info. If anybody wants to carpool, maybe if more than one person asks, they can, connect you guys. I don't know. No meeting in October, but we're having 2 field trips on either side of that. So the Saturday before, on the 19th, we're going to go see Manzanitas of San Bruno Mountain. And I guess there's parts of the trail that are on regular asphalt type stuff. And then there's some that's a little bit more climbing. But if you don't want to do the more rugged stuff, you don't have to. I mean, it's $6 per car. I think it's a state park, actually. And then if you want to go RSVP, you can, or if you have questions, you can check with Dave. And then the next Saturday on October 26th, we're going to Sonoma Botanic Gardens in Glen Ellen. We're going to have a tour guide, so they'll be able to show us everything that's happening there. And then they have the new California native plant area. We'll be touring that as well. And Dave is arranging that one as well. So if you have any questions about that, or if you guys want to get together with someone that needs a ride, or if you can drive as well. And so, yes, we were planning a party, and we've had some hiccups going on, and we didn't think it was fair for vendors and such if we can't really wholeheartedly promote the thing, if it was a possibility that it wouldn't go through. So we've decided to not have the meeting in October. So we'll have to postpone that for hopefully maybe spring or maybe next fall. But it sounded like a fun event, and we'd like to still do it, but it's not going to work out for October. November's meeting, we have a Rinda Garden Club, and I met him at the event at Ruth Bancroft Garden, where they had all the different societies and garden clubs. So it is on the 18th rather than the 16th as it is been advertised. I believe it's going to be Zoom, and there's more information coming out about the field trips. So keep an eye out for that. And sounds like we're gonna have a busy October, even though we're not having a meeting. Emily Griswold from UC Botanic Gardens.
Hello.
Hello. Okay, so Emily Griswold is the director of Gateways, Horticulture, and Teaching Gardens for the UC Davis Arboretum and Public Garden. She has been championing sustainable horticulture in the UC Davis Arboretum for the last 23 years. Starting in 2017, she has been working on developing and implementing the UC Davis Living Landscape Adaptation Plan to transform the campus landscape for resilience in the face of climate change, which I think we probably all need to do. More recently, she has been working with colleagues to develop a climate-ready gardening toolkit to provide climate adaptation resources to home gardeners, which I think is very, very timely. So welcome, Emily. Thanks for giving us a talk.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to speak to you all, and I have been a CalHort member in the past, so I definitely am seeing some familiar faces on this call. I'm here to talk with you about climate-ready gardening, and I figure I'll just launch right into it. So for today, I am hoping to have you all learn a bit more about how to support your garden in planning and preparing for climate change. understand a bit more about the adaptation planning process and some tools and learning resources that can support you on your journey. And then also to inspire you to start climate adaptation in your garden and spread those benefits to your local and regional community. As Ellen mentioned, we've been working on basically adapting the UC Davis campus to climate change basically for the last 7 or 8 years or so. It has been a major focus for our organization. And what we have found is that it has been a really energizing thing for our staff. And also, we've been involving more and more people in this effort, especially UC Davis student interns and our volunteer teams. And it has really been a very positive and an empowering experience for us. And so as we have been working more and more in this realm, we've been thinking, how can we translate this for home gardeners and share these messages more broadly? So that's what we've been working on more recently. So I wanted to start with some kind of basic foundations about climate change. And one of the things that I want to highlight is some of the different responses that we have to climate change. So for a long time, the major focus of kind of community conversation around climate change has been very focused on mitigation. So mitigation is critical because it is about reducing the emissions that cause climate change. And so this is really about, lowering our carbon footprint, using fewer fossil fuels, converting to clean energy. And these are things that are still very important in order to minimize the level of climate change that we're going to be experiencing. But we've also gotten to a point where which I'm hoping you all can see and feel and realize that we are experiencing the climate change right now. So it's not just like, oh, we better reduce emissions because in the future we're gonna experience impacts of climate change. No, we're experiencing them right now. And so there are things that we need to do to adapt to the changes we're already experiencing, and then also adapt to the changes that are kind of baked in with the level of emissions that we are producing as humanity. And so adaptation is basically accepting that there is a certain amount of change that is kind of built in that we need to prepare for. And so it is about altering our behavior to manage the risks of climate change impacts. And so with this, it's been really interesting for me to shift more towards an adaptation focus. So mitigation is still important. I have solar panels on my house. I'm a bike commuter. I'm a vegetarian. I'm doing all of these things to reduce my carbon footprint. But at the same time, all of that mitigation work, it's important, but you don't necessarily feel the impacts. It's like, even though I'm doing all these things, it's not like I'm seeing like, oh, it was a degree cooler today because of all the things that I did. Like so many of these things are impacted at a global scale that we have no control over. So it's important for each of us to do our part. It's important to have, national, international policies to reduce emissions. These things are critically important. But in terms of feeling a personal sense of like, wow, I see the impact of my work, it's not as strong. However, with adaptation, these are things that we can do at home and see the impact. Like I can make changes to my landscape and see the plants performing better. And for me, that is really empowering. So I think gardeners have a very special role to play in climate adaptation. And I'm hoping to convince you of all of that. So in terms of adaptation responses to climate change, there's kind of this continuum of different types of responses. And so at one level, there is what we would call resistance. So resistance is about trying to keep things as they are. And in many cases, that is going to take more effort as the climate changes. So for example, we have like a redwood grove in the Arboretum, and as it gets hotter and drier, those trees are more and more stressed. So resistance is like, let's invest a bunch in caring for these trees, treating the diseases that they're getting because they're stressed, increasing our irrigation, maybe we come up with things like we're going to start fogging the canopy. Those are examples of resistance. Like, let's put as much as we can into sustaining things the way they are, even as the conditions around us change. So at the other end of the spectrum is transition. And transition is actually about facilitating an adaptive response. So making intentional changes to basically adapt to our changing conditions. So for example, with that redwood collection, perhaps it's like, okay, some of these trees are dying. As we take them out, we are going to replace them with other species that are predicted to be more suitable to our future climate. So that is an example of transition. And so this is like, the range of responses that we can have in response to climate change. I don't know how many of you have heard of adaptive management. It's a principle that's used quite a bit in ecological restoration, and really anyone who is a gardener is doing adaptive management. It's about you make a plan, and anyone who grows plants has experienced this. You make a plan, you have a great plan, you put your plants in, you've got your irrigation, whatever you're doing to help grow these plants. And some of the plants do great, and some of them maybe don't do great. And so you adapt, you shift, and try and figure out, okay, maybe I can do something to change my conditions so that these plants will do better. Or maybe I'm going to shift and plant something else in that area. So it is about basically doing your homework, your analysis, your planning, you're taking action, and then you're monitoring. How are things doing? Reflecting, how can I make this better? And then shifting course, taking new actions to adjust to changing circumstances. So that's what climate adaptation is all about as well. We're kind of in this new realm where for a long time there was this sense of, okay, if something did really, really well in the past, it's probably going to do well in the future too, because we were assuming that our climate is relatively stable. With climate change, that kind of throws things a bit more up in the air because we have a lot more uncertainty. And so with that, we can't really have an entirely fixed destination. We can't be fully certain about what the future will bring. So what we need to do is kind of shift to this mode of flexibility, and also, just continue to like read up, like what is the latest science saying about where we're headed, and adapt as needed. Try things out in the landscape, and if they're not working, adapt as needed. So we have kind of a moving target, but in a way that makes a kind of more dynamic system that is perhaps a little bit more exciting and energizing. This is the most sciencey, this is my climate science slide. And this is basically, kind of going through some of the basics of climate change and, the greenhouse effect. So basically what we have is this blanket of heat trapping gases in our atmosphere, and it's getting thicker and it's trapping more heat as we are emitting more carbon dioxide and methane. these greenhouse gases. And so what that means is that with the sun kind of heating up our atmosphere, less of that heat is able to escape back out into the atmosphere. And so we are getting this gradual warming effect because we have more heat trapping. And so when we're using tools to like anticipate the impacts of climate change, there are certain acronyms that you're going to see. And one of them is RCP. So there's RCP 4.5, RCP 8.5. RCP refers to radiative concentration pathways. And it basically is about the level of kind of forced heating that is happening due to the accumulation of greenhouse gases. And I heard a really great analogy for these that helps me understand it. So in a lower emissions scenario, and that is RCP 4.5, what the 4.5 refers to is that there will be 4.5 watts per square meter in 2100. And so if you think of a 4.5 watt light bulb suspended over every square meter of the earth and the heat emitted by those light bulbs, that gives you maybe a little visual of what that means for RCP 4.5. So in a high emission scenario, you would basically double the number of light bulbs. So, or you have like a higher wattage light bulb. So that's 8.5 watts for every square meter by 2100. And so, you know, like a 4-watt light bulb or an 8-watt light bulb, it doesn't seem like it's that warm, but when you think about like the scale of this and having this light bulb like over your head all the time, those are things that make a few degrees difference that can add up to a big difference in terms of climate systems and plant growth. So hopefully that helps translate that a little bit for you, because I want to introduce some tools to you that use some of that language. So there are some technical resources. So I'm not sure how like nerdy climate sciencey you all are, but I wanted to just introduce you. So the state of California does these climate change assessments, and there are regional assessments. And so there's a San Francisco Bay Area region report that basically, you know, goes through what are the predicted impacts of climate change in the San Francisco Bay Area. So if you really want to understand this, this is an amazing free resource that is available to you. So I did like a quick scan of this and pulled out a few things that I thought were relevant for horticulture. So some of the impacts that are anticipated are increased temperature, more variable rainfall, so that would be extreme dry events and then wet events that would cause flooding, less Sierra snowpack in the wintertime, which is going to affect our water supply for irrigation water and domestic water use, a potential decrease in fog. And we know that the redwoods are not going to appreciate that, and the effect that that can have on plants. Sea level rise, which particularly for folks who are in low elevation areas near the bay, that could be an impact, or near the coast. Saltwater intrusion, and I think that is particularly in the Delta region. And then increased risk of wildfire. And so probably none of these things are particularly shocking for you all, but these are the things that we're looking at as the regional impacts. And so when we think about climate change, there are these direct impacts. And so these are actually all pictures from UC Davis, and, you know, impacts that we're experiencing already. So when we've had extreme heat events, it has been like scorching some of our plants. extreme drought events, we have had trees that previously could survive without irrigation that have just basically gone kaput with extreme drought. Extreme wind events, we have been experiencing more trees uprooting, especially when we have extreme wind events in the wintertime when the soils are saturated. And then extreme rain events, where, we've had basically unprecedented, intensity of rainfall that has overwhelmed our stormwater systems and caused our Arboretum waterway to flood. So there are also indirect impacts associated with climate change. One of the indirect impacts is loss of biodiversity. And so, for example, when we have extreme wildfires over a large area, that impacts biodiversity. As the climate shifts and the ranges of plants and animals are going to need to shift, but migration corridors are perhaps impacted by urbanization. That is another example of indirect loss and impact to biodiversity. So these things are compounded by just the level of impact we've already had on our natural systems through urbanization, agriculture, land conversion, invasive species, all of these kinds of things. Another indirect impact is increased pest and disease pressure. So as the climate shifts, it also impacts the ability of insects to like build in concentrations. So, when winters are less cold, there are fewer kind of population controls on insects. And then we're compounding this by just global trade bringing in insects and diseases that our native plants and animals don't have immunity to. So one of the anticipated impacts of climate change is increased pest and disease pressure. And then, of course, there are the impacts on us and our health and well-being, and just the anxiety that comes along with facing all of these kind of simultaneous crises. So even in this presentation, I'm kind of worried about being an enormous downer for you all. So anyway, this is the downer part of the presentation. We're going to move to the solutions part. There are significant impacts, negative impacts associated with climate change, but there are also opportunities. And this is another aspect of climate adaptation is identifying opportunities and looking at how we can take advantage of those. So some of the opportunities that even I was finding in the San Francisco Bay Area Region Report are that natural infrastructure can play an important role in climate change adaptation, enhancing biodiversity and ecosystem services while reducing societal risks. So basically, our natural landscapes and our home garden landscapes can be part of the solution to help basically protect us from some of these threats associated with climate change. And it can be through supporting urban wildlife corridors, fire-safe landscaping, water-conserving landscaping, restoring shorelines for resiliency, and then urban greening in disadvantaged communities to make sure that the benefits, healthy plants and landscapes, are really reaching everyone. So the regional climate assessments, California climate assessments, that's one resource. Another resource out there is CalAdapt. And this is a tool that you can use that is free, developed by the state of California to explore, what the impacts of climate change will be in a very specific location. And so there's, data about annual average temperatures, extreme weather impacts, snowpack levels, sea level rise, wildfire drought scenarios. There's all kinds of data here. And it is helpful, especially kind of at a municipal scale, to be looking at this. I have to admit that personally, I have another tool that I find even more useful for horticulture. So I wanted to just do a little quick, like CalAdapt, it's a thing. Check it out if you are interested in, finding out more about climate change and the tools associated with it. But my favorite thing for horticulture and anticipating impacts on kind of plant zones is the climate toolbox. And so this is at climatetoolbox.org. And there are a bunch of tools in the toolbox, and it's actually kind of overwhelming, but I have found one that I really like, and it is called the Future Climate Dashboard. And so this is just an example that I created for Walnut Creek. So this is the Future Climate Dashboard. You can put in coordinates, or you could put in the name of your city, and it works for any place in the United States. And the resolution of this data is basically a 2.5 square mile grid. And so it is not the finest resolution. We have so many microclimates, especially in the San Francisco Bay Area, but it's pretty darn good. And so with this, you can choose what kind of data you want to look at. So this is an example. So on the right-hand side of the slide, you can look at heat index, summer temperatures, winter temperatures, growing degree days, water, the growing season, chilling. So these are all things that I think they're really developed particularly for farmers, but they really work for gardeners as well. So for me, I was looking at summer temperatures. And so you can look at this under different emission scenarios. So a lower emission scenario, if you're an optimist, you can look at a lower emission scenario, and you can see how summer temperatures will change over time. So in Walnut Creek, the average high in the summer right now is 88. In, 60 years, it'll be a couple degrees warmer at 90 degrees. And then the hottest summer temperatures will go from being 103 degrees to 106 degrees. So that's an example of a low emissions scenario. So this is summer temperatures at the high emissions scenario, and you can see that it's a few degrees warmer. So by the 2080s, the average high would be 94 degrees, with the hottest temperatures being 109 degrees. That's an example that's just looking at summer temperatures. You can also look at the heat index. So how many days will it be over 90 degrees or over 100 degrees? So this is the high emission scenario. This is basically kind of the worst case scenario. So you would be going from 35 days over 90 degrees to 97 days over 90 degrees by the 2085s. And from 4 days over 100 degrees to 30 days over 100 degrees. So that gives you a sense of how, summer heat would be changing over time with these different scenarios. You can also look at water, and so this is not only the annual rainfall, but also the annual evapotranspiration, which is basically how much water is lost from evaporation from the soil and transpiration from plants. And the difference between precipitation and evapotranspiration, so basically rainfall and how much water is evaporating from plants in the soil, is the water deficit. So it's basically like how severely droughty is the climate. So that is measured here in the water deficit. So currently that would be negative 38 inches. And then with the high emission scenario, that would increase by about 5 inches. closer to the end of the century. So these are just examples of the type of data that you could be getting. And you can be looking at whatever time frame you're interested in. You might be just interested in the next 15, 20 years. What I would suggest is if you're planting a long-lived tree, that you think longer into the future. If you're planting like a little, perennial, probably doesn't matter that much. So think about the lifespan of the plant that you're planting and how important is it to you that it survive and thrive over many decades to come. I'm responsible for a public landscape at an institution where even though I'll be retired in 20 years, somebody is going to be responsible for continuing to take care of these plants. And so I need to be thinking, with this multi-decade perspective. There are also some cool tools out there that give you a sense of what the climate will be like, and thinking about it in kind of a geographic sense. And so this is kind of a fun tool, the Future Urban Climates web application. And so basically you can find the city that is closest to you and decide what your scenario parameters are, and it will tell you what city your climate will be like in 60 years. And so for a high emission scenario, Concord's climate in 2080 will feel more like Rosedale, California, in 60 years. So how is that helpful? Well, you could kind of cross-reference that with the Sunset Western Garden zones and look at, okay, well, what zone am I in now? And what zone will the climate in this region be in the future? And then you can look at what plants do well in this zone and what plants do well in that zone. And it can give you kind of a prediction of what is going to do well in the future. So that is kind of the background on some of the climate related tools. And now I want to just get into some of the key themes and aspects of our climate ready gardening program. And I want to give credit to the US Botanic Garden for providing funding for us to really start developing this program. So we have 4 major themes that we highlight as part of this program. And so the key and this really echoes the Living Landscape Adaptation Plan that we developed for the UC Davis campus. So the 4 focal areas are trees, biodiversity, water, and health. And so I'm just going to go through some aspects of each of those. So trees, I'm hoping as like fellow plant loving people that I don't need to convince you how amazing trees are. But trees, of course, provide fantastic benefits. And especially as we look at a warming climate, trees provide shade and they cool the air as they transpire. So they help make urban spaces more cool and livable. And I'm imagining if you live in the fog belt, you may not feel the appreciation as intensely as we do in the Central Valley, where we do not have a cloud, not a single cloud from basically June until September. In the Valley, we really appreciate our trees, and they are really essential for having livable spaces. Trees also provide tremendous habitat for wildlife, and of course they sequester carbon, so they are helping on a mitigation front as well as an adaptation front. So trees are having a hard time, so they are needing to endure higher temperatures and more extreme heat events, weather whiplash with more extreme droughts, more extreme storms and rainfall events, more extreme windstorms, new pest and disease issues, and then potential water use restrictions due to the loss of snowpack. So as our most long-lived garden species, and really our largest kind of framework elements of our gardens, trees have an outsized role to play in our landscapes. And they are, in many ways, because of their longevity and kind of woody frameworks, more vulnerable. What we're finding is that, you know, tree suitability is changing. So historically, coast redwoods were actually the most commonly planted tree on the UC Davis campus. And what we're finding is that the redwoods are really suffering as our climate is changing. And so we're going to need to shift our tree selection for the campus canopy to other species. And it's not just redwoods. In so many parts of California, our urban forests are made up of species that really prefer cooler, wetter climates. And so, you know, in California, we've always had this luxury of we'll just add water and we can grow anything. And so I feel like climate denialism is kind of baked into California horticulture. And unfortunately, climate change is making that climate denialism more and more difficult to sustain. So trees are a special focus of mine because I am thinking about the campus urban forest, and I'm also very involved with Tree Davis, which is a local nonprofit. So I'm going to go a little deeper into trees because I'm really passionate about this topic. So our key tree adaptation strategies are to proactively address pest and disease issues, to really work to preserve existing trees, and then identify and plant climate-ready trees for the future. Addressing pests and diseases, basically the history of urban forestry is all about basically over-reliance on certain species and then watching them all fade with introduced pest and disease issues. So Dutch elm disease wiped out urban forests in the Midwest in the middle of the 20th century. And then more recently, emerald ash borer has been wiping out ash trees. And I just heard that emerald ash borer is now in California. It has been in Oregon for a few years now, but it is in California now. So our ash trees are definitely at risk from emerald ash borer. And so with these pest and disease issues, there is this challenge that climate change alone is causing stresses on our trees that make them more susceptible to pests and diseases. And so without proactive treatment, pest and disease issues can kind of compound on these other stresses and lead to decline and death of trees. So this is why monitoring and really proactively looking out for these issues is really important. And there are things that we need to be looking out for. So emerald ash borer is one of them. Invasive shothole borers are now found in San Jose, and they have affected a huge range of species in Southern California. So we need to be on the lookout for that as well. The earlier we can catch these things, the more effective we can be in managing them. And so part of that is also being mindful about not moving firewood around, because that can be a major way of spreading these pest issues. And then also seeking expert advice on treatment. And there are some great resources with UC Integrated Pest Management, or UC IPM, that provide science-based resources on how to control pests and diseases or manage them. And so a big lesson that has been learned over and over again with urban forestry is the more diverse our urban forests are, the more resilient they are to these kinds of pest and disease issues. So if you have an entire street that is lined with one species, and there is a pest that comes in that affects that species, it basically, you know, kind of wipes out an entire street worth of trees. Versus if you have a mix of different species and genera and families that are represented, there is going to be more resilience to these types of issues. So this is just a photo of an example of California black walnut trees lining Russell Boulevard in Davis. So when I first moved to town, you know, it was this beautiful avenue of trees, and with thousand cankers disease, which has come in over the last decade or so, it is, you know, dwindled to just like a few kind of sickly trees. So this is the vulnerability we have when we are over reliant on, you know, just a handful of species for our tree canopy. So that's something. You all love plant diversity, so this is just another reason for you to take pride in being the only one on your street with you know, a special tree species. That is actually building the resilience of the urban forest in your neighborhood. Preserving mature trees is also really important. So we need to have the benefit of that mature canopy. And one of the challenges is that in many landscapes in California, trees were selected to be planted in a irrigated lawn. And so the species of tree was selected for its tolerance of lawn irrigation, and it has been irrigated its entire life. And so with more and more people doing turf conversions, we need to make sure that we're continuing to irrigate the trees that were part of those landscapes. And so we can't just, you know, turn off the spigot and expect those trees to survive. So continuing to irrigate mature trees and then, you know, mulching them to conserve moisture and prevent compaction is really important. And there are some great models out there of irrigation setups that you can do, like with drip irrigation, to continue to irrigate trees when you're converting landscapes. Another aspect of caring for mature trees is also making sure that they are assessed on a cycle to ensure that they have good structural strength. So if this was an example of a mature limb that had excessive end weight, and especially as we have these stronger wind events, the trees are more vulnerable to limb breakage and things like this. So it is an investment, but trees bring a lot of benefits to us. So it's just something to keep an eye on. If you have a venerable old tree that you really value, that's something that you're going to want to have an arborist take a look at every few years to make sure that it is structurally sound. And then this is a strategy that I'm really excited about, which is planting climate-ready trees for the future. So with climate change, past performance of trees is less predictive of future success. And so what that means is that we need to be kind of looking beyond what is always done well in our communities to what is going to do well now and into the future. And we need to be adding more diversity. So these are things that are actually exciting for me, because it's like, ooh, here's a role for plant geeks to be like, hey, there are some really cool heat and drought tolerant species that we should be trying. Let's experiment more. Let's not just plant the status quo. Let's work on, you know, updating our recommended tree lists so that we're not recommending redwood trees for the Central Valley. And we are also working on shifting what's available in nurseries towards things that are more suited for our future climate. So there are some great examples of research at UC Davis on climate-ready trees. And so this is the climate-ready tree research plot at UC Davis. And so there are folks, including at the Arboretum, we've been doing research bringing in new tree species from the Southwest to test in this area. So there are a lot of folks who are really excited and interested in testing out new tree species for our region, and we're finding some good candidates out there. So what can be a little overwhelming is like the criteria for a good tree for the future. So it needs to be heat tolerant, cold tolerant, not invasive, pest and disease resistant, drought tolerant, have strong branch strength so that with extreme winds, it's not going to fall apart. And then it just keeps going. Flood tolerance is helpful, and compaction tolerant in an urban space, pH adaptability. There are all kinds of things. Root issues in an urban space. So we need to be careful about planting things that are going to buckle sidewalks or root sprout and cause maintenance issues. Allergens, not my favorite topic because I love wind pollinated trees. Longevity, whether the tree species is overplanted, and then whether it's actually available in nurseries. So there's a lot to consider when planting a tree, but we do have some great resources. So we can be looking at just old reliables like the Sunset Western Garden book, thinking not just about your current plant zone, but what the future climate is going to be for your zone, and looking at kind of your future sunset zone and your current sunset zone. And then I don't know how many of you have used this, but Select Tree is an awesome website for tree selection, and it has information about things like branch strength and root damage potential that are not necessarily part of other horticultural references. So it also has fantastic photographs of trees. So this is a wonderful resource as well. And then for looking at climate adaptation, there's actually a very special tool that was developed by Botanic Gardens Conservation International. And this is particularly for trees, and it's geared towards botanic gardens. And so you can basically select any botanic garden in the world, or you can enter a latitude and longitude, and then look up a tree species. And so I think this one, so for my example here, I looked up for UC Davis Arboretum, I looked up Chinese pistache as an example. And you can describe what your emissions scenario is and look at what year you want to be looking into the future. And it will actually give you an indication of how likely that tree species is to survive in your area in the future. So anyway, it's a cool, fun tool to play with if you're interested in trees and climate change. So that was trees. So biodiversity is, as I mentioned, with our biodiversity crisis, this is a role that home gardeners can play in supporting biodiversity. And I'm sure many of you have heard Doug Tallamy's very powerful messages about how important it is to plant native plants in home landscapes to support food webs. There's been a huge focus on pollinators over the last decade, and conservation of all of these wild creatures. So what we plant in our home gardens can have a big impact on the habitat in our urban areas. And it's actually really gratifying because in a short duration, you can go from something like, you know, a lawn or maybe a kind of a barren field, and you plant some native plants, and all of a sudden, like these pollinators show up. It's actually really satisfying and inspiring, really, how powerful it can be to plant these plants and see the impact that they have on our local biodiversity. There's another aspect to biodiversity, which is plant diversity. And I probably don't need to sing the praises of plant diversity to you all, but basically planting a huge diversity of plants supports a diversity of pollinators and wildlife. And something that I have been observing over the last few years is what I call the climate apocalypse test garden in my neighborhood. So this is a traffic circle that gets no irrigation, and it's surrounded by asphalt, and it has no shade at all. And so in terms of thinking about like what are the survivor plants that are really going to make it and not require much care, what I've found is that some of these shrubs, woody ground covers, perennial grasses, succulents, bulbs, and annuals are some of our toughest plants. And so I just want to inspire you. And some of what I was tickled by is some of the bulbs that you were sharing. It's like, oh my God, those are in my presentation. So there are all kinds of shrubs from California, Mediterranean climate regions of the world, and the Southwest that have, you know, fantastic ornamental features and are also incredibly tough. Woody ground covers. So these, my colleague Ryan Deering calls these smothering spreaders. So one of the big challenges in maintaining any kind of ornamental landscape is weed management, and the smothering spreaders are a huge asset in reducing kind of our weeding workload. So these are all examples of smothering spreaders. And then of course, perennial grasses. So grasses are, you know, they help control erosion, they have deep root systems, and many of them are beautiful blooming plants that add seasonal texture and color to the landscape. So we have some wonderful toughies out there that are quite resilient and love heat. Succulents, fantastic succulents do well in this region. And then I think 3 of these species were just part of the plant forum. So here's Drymia, Rhodophylla, and Sternbergia. So I guess I'm like right on theme here, as well as, of course, all the spring bulbs. So fantastic to have these plants that, you know, store all these resources in the bulb during the summertime, and then deliver these wonderful surprises in the fall and the spring, perfectly adapted to our climate. And then, of course, all the fantastic annual wildflowers that do so well in California. So that's my whirlwind through biodiversity. So water, we have the feast and the famine. So we have the extreme droughts that we need to prepare for, as well as flooding. This is actually basically my husband standing in our driveway during an extreme rain event a couple years ago. With water, of course, we need to be thinking about how we can conserve water in our gardens, and choosing plants that don't require as much irrigation. So a really wonderful resource for that is the WUCLS database. So this is the water use classification of landscape species. And you can look up any city or region, and it will give you a list of plants, and you can select whether you want very low, moderate water use. So this is basically a resource developed by horticultural experts. So I have to admit, a lot of this is anecdotal information, but it's like the best knowledge gleaned from the experts about these plants. So I don't know if any of you still have lawns, but this is something that you know, we're working on converting all over campus. And one of the most popular articles on the Arboretum website is about my colleague Stacy Parker breaking up with her lawn. And so when she moved into her house, she sheet mulched and planted drought tolerant plants in her front yard, and has had phenomenal success in getting her new garden going, and has really been inspiring for many of our visitors. So I heard a little bit of talk about overhead irrigation and the merits of spray irrigation. Of course, I think it's not a surprise to anyone that the most efficient irrigation systems are going to be drip irrigation. And so this is an example on the left of a conversion project I've been working on in Central Park Gardens in Davis, from an overhead spray irrigation system to a drip irrigation system. And so there are these conversion parts where you can basically convert from overhead pop-up sprinklers to drip. What we have found is that the most effective drip irrigation has been subsurface irrigation. And it's tricky if you have an established garden because you don't necessarily want to trench through everything. But if you're starting a new garden, we have had tremendous results from subsurface drip irrigation, because you are basically irrigating down deep, encouraging plant roots to grow deeper into the soil profile. And if the irrigation is deep enough, when you run it, it's actually not wetting the surface of the soil. And so it's not causing weed problems during the summertime, which is a huge labor savings. So we've had incredible results from that. Of course, the challenge with surface drip irrigation is if you have rodent issues, that can be difficult to manage. So there's dealing with water scarcity, which is one side of the coin. The other is dealing with excessive water. And this is where on campus we have been working on creating bioswales and basins to capture this water, which also creates kind of new horticultural opportunities to plant some of these wetland and flood tolerant plants that have also really enhanced the habitat value of our landscapes. So this is something for more and more of us to be thinking about. I myself feel badly every time it rains. The storm drains or the gutters coming, my downspouts are leading right to my driveway, and I'm just watching it all run away. So the more that we can capture that runoff in our landscapes and help it infiltrate into the soil, it's recharging groundwater aquifers, but it's also carrying that water deeper into your soil profile, where you're basically banking it for your plants to use later in the season. So the last theme I wanted to cover is really about health. And I have a feeling that you all are already enjoying these health benefits of gardening. But if you haven't heard the latest research, basically gardening improves your cognitive ability. It makes you smarter. It benefits your mood and overall happiness. So gardeners are smarter and happier. They are less stressed. So gardening and being outside in nature reduces feelings of and physiological responses to stress. It increases the number of social connections and the quality of social relationships. It boosts your physical health and well-being. and it provides protection from all kinds of diseases, including diabetes, obesity, ADHD, cardiovascular disease, depression, and more. So talk about like a miracle drug. Gardening and being out in nature is tremendously renewing for our health and well-being. And to me, for those social benefits, there's nothing better than working with friends and neighbors on creating climate-ready landscapes in our local public spaces. So this is a project that I worked on in my local neighborhood park, N Street Park, and we were doing a major turf conversion project, and I worked on the planting design and worked with Tree Davis to recruit all kinds of neighbors to help plant this area. And it is really thriving and adds so much richness to this public space. So I highly encourage you to consider the health benefits of doing this with your friends and neighbors. And this is a way that our climate-ready gardening can go beyond our, individual home gardens to our regions and really start to affect things as a global movement. So I just have a few more slides to share with you about resources. So we do have a climate-ready gardening toolkit that we're continuing to build on our website. And so there are examples of lawn conversion projects, plant lists, sample planting plans, demonstration gardens that you can visit, water conservation tips, and also information about NatureRx, the health and wellness benefits of gardening. And we are in the midst of basically reviewing our Arboretum All-Star plant list and shifting it with climate change in mind. And so in this transition period, we're calling our climate-ready plants our future favorites. And you can find a list of these plants on our climate-ready gardening toolkit website. We're going to be unveiling another 20 or so plants this fall in preparation for our fall plant sales. And so if you haven't come out to UC Davis, if you come on a plant sale day, then you have a chance to check out our nursery. We're going to have lots of information about climate-ready gardening there, and also visit our garden. So I encourage you to take a field trip and come visit us this fall for one of our plant sales. So that's my last slide. I've dumped a huge amount of information on you. I hope some of it has been helpful, and I would be happy to take any questions that you have.
Yeah. Great. Thanks, Emily. I loved all the ideas and resources, and we'll be at the plant sales for definitely sure. Does anybody have any questions for Emily?
I have a question. One of the slides that you showed, it was all about the different major impacts of climate change. And one of the impacts was the reduced snowpack. Mm-hmm. What I didn't see on that list was the rapidness of any snowpack that we get being melting away and leaving us without that water because it runs through the reservoirs into the rivers and into the ocean. And I was wondering if you had any thing to say about that, because I tend to obsessively monitor our snowpack every winter because it's kind of fun. And I noticed how very rapidly our snowpack this year went from being well above average to dropping like a rock after the middle of April. And I just was wondering if you had anything that you could say about that.
Yeah, so I have to say that that is not my expertise, but one of the ways that we can think about our Sierra snowpack is basically as a frozen reservoir in the mountains. So it is basically kind of our part of our water storage system. And so the longer it stays kind of frozen heading into the late spring and summer, and the more it is kind of gradually released through slower melting, the better off we are. And so definitely more rapid melting is going to reduce the amount of water that we can actually use, because as it's melting, how can we capture it? It's through our, lake reservoirs. And if those are at full capacity, then it's basically just going out into the ocean. Mm-hmm. So for us to be able to use it over a long period, it is most helpful for it to stay, frozen longer into the warm season in the Sierras. So definitely that's a concern. And that is part of kind of the reduction of the snowpack, is like the reduction of the, the kind of water storing capacity that we can use for our various urban uses.
Thank you.
I am going to interject a thought that is going to be controversial. I fortunately can afford to pay for water, and I did get my water level down during the drought to the level that East Bay Mud required, which was less than half what I normally used, and my plants survived. Mm-hmm. But as soon as we had rain, I look at it as the option of I can go back to watering, which I can afford to do, and strengthen my plants, much like it would happen in nature in a drought. You want, during the strong rainy periods, the plants get stronger. They build what I call critical mass, mm-hmm. and they have a better way of surviving future droughts. I lost practically nothing in the last drought. And I went back to watering, and I'm going to, again, I'm sure be told I have to reduce, and I will. But, and I also know psychologically that most people could not even imagine doing this, but my take is it either goes out to the ocean or it goes into my plant and develops critical mass. I'd rather develop the critical mass. Just sharing a thought. I don't think you could get the general population to adhere to that concept. It would be very difficult to educate them of the concept.
Yeah, I mean, you all are a sophisticated horticultural bunch, so you are not the general gardening population.
Yeah, I know.
And if this is really your passion and your main hobby, and the government is not, stopping you from using that water, like, I can see that there are values of using that water for your plant collection. So just in terms of, and in terms of our messaging for the general public, there are so many people that are kind of not even, they're not even paying attention to how much water they're using.
Right.
And they're going from over irrigation in some cases to like kind of an extreme of nothing, or planting all these drought tolerant plants and still over irrigating them. So anyway, there's a lot of nuance to water use. And Dave Fugino, the director of the California Center for Urban Horticulture, always emphasizes that plants do not save water. So if you put a, drought tolerant plant in your landscape, that doesn't mean that you save water. It's the person who is actually running the irrigation that saves water.
Right.
Could I interject as well at this point? Because I have to somewhat agree with Kristen that watering is a luxury some of us have that we can do. But on the other hand, it's something I think should be somewhat obligated to do if we live in cities and urban areas that have these heat sinks and reflected heat. Gardens and gardeners, I think, have a responsibility to bring greenery to our infrastructures. And I would first thank you, Emily, for being here. Some of you may not know that Emily was one of our main consultants on the Summer Dry Garden book. So she is well known, I think, in the industry as a leader of proponing these sort of good plants. And UC Davis itself is just a huge resource. But I would advocate in the whole Summer Dry project that I'm part of, that we owe it to the rest of the people who live in cities to actually do some watering. That water is a resource that we in cities need to use wisely. We shouldn't waste it, but it's something we can't do without. And as Kristen said, it's a way of storing water when it's available, to make it more resilient, but also in the summers when it's really hot, it's a resource that we need to bring. We absolutely need to get the right trees that are ready for the future, but they require water just to get started. And there's a calculus that we ought to be thinking about in how much water we use is how much we actually get in urban areas. Urban areas only get 10% of the water we capture as a culture. And so we should reroute, in my opinion, some of that water back to cities. And that goes through bureaucracy and zoning and advocacy. That's not, I think it's important that we are aware of that and speak to the gardeners who can make a difference. I think, Emily, you're quite right that there are a lot of people who are just wasting water entirely and aren't even aware of the possibilities. But water is, I'm fearful that we cut off too much water to gardens. We're going to kill all the street trees. We're going to kill all the greenery. We won't have that green infrastructure that we really need.
Yeah, and that I think is so important to climate change in terms of the cities are the heat sinks.
Yep.
And I'm appalled. In Italy, they build a building now and almost everything is green. Their balconies and the greenery is part of the design, and we're not doing that here.
Unfortunately, there's kind of a perception that spending water on landscapes is frivolous, and that is not a philosophy that I am espousing, because I think, urban landscapes are critically important.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else have any comments or questions for Emily?
I have a historical question. Going back to your comment, Emily, about redwoods at UC Davis, when was that ever a good idea?
And I was not a great planter of redwoods, let me tell you. But honestly, you look around Sacramento, there are a ton of redwood trees.
Yeah, there are.
So they, if you give them a bunch of water, if you're not in a limited water mindset, they historically grew quite well with summer irrigation in the Sacramento Valley. We're having issues with water quality in Davis where that, like boron and salts in our water are causing, marginal burn. And the extreme heat is definitely impacting their health. But historically, you could grow them quite successfully.
Okay. I want to make a comment just for everyone's benefit. There is a podcast called 99% Invisible. It is a local podcast by this guy named Roman Mars in Oakland. And they recently did a 6-part series called Not Built for This. And it was all about all of the various ways in which climate change is having an impact on the planet. And so they go through how our cities aren't built for it, how plant life isn't built for it. For instance, saguaro cactus are dying from the heat in Arizona, which is kind of striking. I recommend it. It was very educational to hear such, the strokes of information coming from all different directions on the exact topic that we covered tonight. So it's 6 hours of very good podcasting.
Can you put that in the chat?
Sure. Good idea. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sure you all are familiar with some of the great sessions with Pacific Horticulture as well, like the Garden Futurist podcast. There have been some great ones about climate change and preparing for climate change with our gardens on that as well.
Definitely something to think about and to definitely plan for as you're reviving different things in your garden and redoing areas and such. So that's great to have that foresight to think about these things and that prompt to do that. So thank you so much for your presentation.
Yeah, it was
thank
great.
you.
You're
Yeah.
welcome.
I have a quick question. Does the sale at UC Davis put out a plant list beforehand to see if it's worth our driving all the way up there?
Absolutely. Yeah. So
Great.
if you check our website, we typically post our inventory a couple weeks before the first fall sale, and we do an updated inventory before each sale. So yeah. And if you can actually sign up for our leaflet, so you don't need to be a member to receive our email newsletter. And if you get the leaflet, then you'll be notified when the inventory is available.
Thank you. Great.
And they have great organized plant sales with all that student help.
Yes.
Yeah.
Students are essential to pretty much everything we do.
Another
Have a
quick
good night.
comment.
Oh,
For anybody that hasn't been to UC Davis, it's great just walking around campus because they've really made a point of putting in these fantastic plant installations at all the intersections of streets and sidewalks. So it's just an abundance of plant life of all different varieties and succulents. It's just great to walk around.
Emily may have left, but that whole campus is part of her inspiration. It's called the Gateways program, where the gateways to the university are now planted with much more sustainable and resilient plantings. And that's, I think, to Emily's credit, and it's a great resource. When I was doing my recent book, I bet 40% of the new photos I took were at Davis because of the work they're doing, and it's so much hotter there. I think it's appropriate that we showcase plants from the hotter climate. So it's a great resource. It's just really fun to wander around Davis.
Okay, thank you, Emily. Really appreciate the talk. It was really, again, great to get all these different aspects and all these resources that you've provided. It's wonderful, the toolkit. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Emily.